Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to those of you who are joining us here at CSIS and also those of you online. My name is Nick Sechaney. I'm a Vice President in the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department and Senior Fellow with the Japan Chair here at CSIS. And on behalf of the Japan Chair and the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at CSIS, real pleasure to welcome you to this event on U.S. Japan clean energy cooperation. Last month, on February 7th, President Trump hosted Prime Minister Ishiba of Japan for a bilateral summit meeting, and they issued a joint statement that had a very lengthy section titled Growth and Prosperity, talking about how economic cooperation between the two countries will evolve going forward. And that section included a lot on bilateral energy cooperation. There were references to Japan potentially importing liquefied natural gas or more of it from the United States, references to bilateral cooperation to secure supply chains for critical minerals, and also the potential to do more work on advanced nuclear reactor technology and other issues. There's been a lot of progress in recent years on a so-called clean energy agenda between the U.S. and Japan, focused, of course, on economic growth, but also economic security as the geopolitical environment becomes increasingly complex. So we thought it would be a very good idea to bring together experts from the U.S. and Japan to sort of take stock of this agenda, exchange views on the policies of the respective governments, and explore avenues to sustain momentum in what has become a pillar of alliance cooperation. And so today you're going to hear from a very distinguished panel of experts from both countries. We had a very dynamic discussion earlier today focused on three general themes. One was how to encourage innovation. The second was how to encourage supply chain resiliency. Supply chain resiliency. And the third was how to encourage financing in both countries in this area, reflecting the important role that, of course, the private sector has to play in making this a very substantive area of bilateral cooperation. This collection of experts who you'll hear from in a moment will each produce essays that CSIS will publish in a few weeks, and look out for that. But this event is really intended as a preview, sort of a summary of key takeaways thus far, and what we hope will become one of many bilateral dialogues on this topic. So without further ado, let me invite my colleague Jane Nakano and our guests from Japan to come up to the stage for our first panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nick. On behalf of the CSIS Energy Security and Climate Change Program, I cannot tell you how happy I am that we are looking at this area of great importance to both nations in the context of the bilateral relationship, because there's so much potential between our two countries. Without further ado, let me introduce three distinguished experts from Japan. They're also the authors of these essays that Nick just mentioned. I guess the farthest, to your left, is Ikuo Nishimura. Mr. Nishimura is director and the head of the research department with the Japan Electric Power Information Center, JEPIC. And it's JEPIC is a research and consultant body for the electric power industry in Japan. Mr. Nishimura is a longtime professional who's engaged in the regulatory affairs and also policy developments in the field of energy efficiency, and climate change in Japan. And he's the author of the supply chain theme for this project that we have. To his left is Sumiko Takeuchi. She's a senior fellow and member of the board of directors with the International Environment and Economy Institute Dr. Takeuchi is a member of Japan's GX, Green Transformation Implementation, that's chaired by the Prime Minister of Japan. Among multiple hats that she wears, she's also specially appointed professor at the Tohoku University, as well as the co-founder and co-president of U3 Innovations LLC. To her left and to my immediate right is Motoshi Tomita. He's a research scientist with the Central Research Institute of Electric Power Industry, CREEPI, of Japan. And CREEPI is more of a Japanese version of EPRI, if that's a fair way to describe it. Dr. Tomita is a researcher on the sustainable finance and environmental policy, focusing on climate and biodiversity. So thank you again for being here. And let me just jump right into some of the really key questions that I think the audience would benefit hearing from you. As so you each had the theme. So Nishimura-san on supply chain security, and Takeuchi-san on the innovation, and then Tomita-san on private finance. And as you think of these sort of topics or themes, if you could explain to the audience how your topic feature in sort of Japan's overall energy policy debate, and what are some of the strategic challenges that are shaping this policy debate in Japan, and why is it that Japan wants to advance these issues? So maybe let me start with Nishimura-san.
Okay, Jane, thank you very much. From my viewpoint of supply chain resiliency for green energy technologies, I related to our recent cabinet approval of 7 strategic energy plan on February 18th, and this year encompassing energy supply and demand scenarios in line with aspirational 2050 net zero goal. So while plan shows a scenario assuming slower technological development and the consequent downward reduction of greenhouse gases, but other scenarios generally assume high penetration of variable renewables and serving increased demand for electricity. So when we talk supply chain resiliency for clean energy technologies, we can stay apart from a type of threat of heavy reliance on a handful of suppliers and consequent market disruption where intended or not intended, and potential state management and control, and the role China played in the supply chain. So looking at geographic concentration of solar photovoltaics and batteries, there is high concentration manufacturing capacity in China throughout their production processes. So that is one critical issue. And those, Chinese strengths came from, consistent policy support at various levels of central and subnational government worked out to facilitate technology acquisition and manufacturing scale-up and process-level innovation and creation of industrial clusters and integrated supply chains and the addressing overcapacity issue to create a vital domestic market. And also, we can't forget that existence of multiple players in each segment in the value chain and market competition among themselves also contribute to the falling cost of solar module and making it affordable alternatives. This makes Chinese solar industry further sophisticated and hard to compete. And coming back to the clean energy supply chain issues, clean energy products, namely wind, solar, and batteries, are material intensive, especially critical minerals, and are careful consideration for supply chain resilience. Again, about China, they enacted rare earth resource management regulation in China, which came into force October 2024, and which further raised concern. The regulation clearly states rare earth resources belong to the state, and the state shall regulate the total amount of rare earth mining, smelting, separation, and optimize dynamic management. So the regulation applies to the product circulation, import and export, as well as mining, smelting, and separation. So in response to this challenging environment, Japanese government enacted Economic Security Promotion Act of 2022 and identifies critical products with strategic importance. And under the policy for securing stable supply of critical minerals of 2023, set a procurement target, as well as provided support in areas of exploration, mine development, and smelting. But as there emerge occasions when the competitive investment practiced by international players goes far beyond the business risks vis-à-vis borne by the private sector, and consequently limit access to resources interests for Japanese manufacturers, I think those policy actions are crucial for the supply chain resilience. Japan has also sought cooperation with the U.S. and like-minded countries through the U.S.-led initiatives as Mineral Supply Partnership and the Supply Chain Pillar of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. It's a general expectation for the business community. Those trade framework continue to be on the table and further developed, including the resource-producing country in the future.
Thank you, Nishimura-san. Takeuchi-san?
Thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. For Japan, clean energy innovation means more than clean. Japan has no fossil fuel resources, so carbon neutrality is not just as an environmental issue, but an issue that contributes to energy security with increased energy sufficiency, which naturally attracts a great deal of policy attention. For this reason, Japan has long been engaged in energy innovation. However, there are some strategic challenges that need to be addressed in order to move forward with policy discussions. The first challenge is who will be in overall command of innovation, who will decide which technology should be supported and how. After the oil crisis, Japanese government established NEDO as an organization to promote energy clean technology innovation and energy saving technology. However, NEDO is a subordinate organization of Ministry of Economy and Industry. So I'm concerned that METI may have too much influence over the decisions about which technologies to support, or more strongly to say that political influence may lead to misjudge about the feasibility of technologies. So this is my concern, and there may be no system that is the best. Another thing to consider is that while institutional and regulatory reform is quite important for innovation, and who should take the lead in promoting these reforms is an issue. The Cabinet Office have had several related bodies, including the Council for Science, Technology, and Innovation, and the Council for Regulatory Reform, both of which are headed by the Prime Minister. And I used to serve as a member of the Council for Regulatory Reform, but I didn't feel that there wasn't any coordination between the various councils. I think that many of the discussions at Council for Regulatory Reforms to promote innovation, but rather than reviewing old and outdated regulations. So I think that there is a need to strengthen the coordination between ministries, agencies, and governmental committee regarding the formulation of systems and regulatory reform necessary to promote innovation. And I'd like to make a quick comment on the other challenge, that Japan is not in a good condition to take the first step of clean innovation, which is introduce decarbonized electricity. Yeah, Japan is not favorable for renewable and introduction of renewable energy. Our land is not vast and mountainous, and it is also difficult to gain public consensus on the use of nuclear power. Yesterday, March 11th, was the exactly 14 years after since the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident. Many Japanese media are extremely negative about the government's policy of using nuclear power. So Japan faces a challenge in taking the first step of securing decarbonized power source. That is the first step of the green technology innovation. So that's my comment.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And Tomita-san, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, kind introduction, and thank you for having me. So, in terms of private finance, mobilizing the private finance toward the clean energy transition is obviously one of the central pillars of the Japanese the policy. So, Japan recently published green transformation policy, namely GX in short. So, Japan GX policy, within the GX policy, the Japanese government committed to invest 20 trillion Japanese yen, or in other words, 140 billion US dollar upfront investments to leverage the approximately 1 trillion US dollar of the public and private finance towards clean energy transitions. So this is a strong commitment on Japanese governments. So Japanese government commitment comes first to mobilize the much more private money. This is the pillar of the Japanese policy. The strategic challenge to mobilizing finance is the financing because it's a realistic pathway, which means considering the Japanese unique energy circumstances, which heavily depends on the fossil fuel now. They're also securing the Japanese energy securities, because Japan's rely on a lot of the fossil fuel import now. There also Japanese economic prosperity, of course. That is the burden in the additional cost to the customers. So the challenge is financing green is straightforward. So how to challenge the so-called transitional intermediate technologies toward clean energy transition. This is the challenge. Also, another challenge is how to mobilize the finance to close-to-market technology like hydrogen, ammonia, next generation nuclear battery as well. So, for tackling the challenge, Japan recently developed a dedicated capital market for the transition beside the green. So, this is the dedicated market, and this market is particularly dedicated to the financing the transition of the high-emitting sectors. For this purpose, the Japanese government developed a guidance for transition finance for the private actors. Also, the Japanese government made a strong commitment by issuing Japan's world first transition sovereign debt to the market to make a dedicated capital market of transitions.
Thank you so much. There's actually quite a bit that we could be unpacking, but I wanted to definitely ask you sort of a slightly different set of questions, but certainly you can all read their papers for more details on any and in all these elements that the authors just highlighted. But Nishimura-san, you've already mentioned some element of the sort of a U.S. Japan cooperation, but if I could invite all three, speakers, panelists to sort of share with us, what you think that the Japanese government or Japan see, what are the benefits that you see in, Japan collaborating with international or foreign partners such as the United States. And then specifically, what are the areas that are ripe for the bilateral collaboration? And it's not really limited to some sort of collaboration or cooperation, taking place in Japan, by U.S. Stakeholders coming in or going out. It could be also, in the third-party country or even in the multilateral organizations. But if you could share, what could be done really in, supply chains, please.
Yeah. So I think Japan is an important dependent country, especially for natural resources. So we sometimes differentiate the policy approaches and diplomatic position from those in the United States. But when it comes to critical minerals and also the clean energy product, including the economic production and security concerns and supply chain challenges, constitute the common ground for both countries, and also extended to like-minded countries. So what I think we can probably most say possibly do between the United States and Japan could be the first, the strengthening of the policy dialogue and the restore the practical policy goals and instruments with consideration to key parameters, say, with consideration to not only to carbon intensity or energy efficiency, but also to resource efficiency and critical material intensity. So clear indication of target and commitment by the government through regulatory initiative and incentive will be useful for the creation of supply chain for new products and technology in immature market. It is, however, true that putting too much emphasis on a single technology like solar and artificial creation of accelerate demand will lead to the, say, unfavorable situation which we already experienced in the past. So we should note that the complex and capital-intensive process to build and or expand manufacturing capacity create a time lag. A country easily misses opportunity to create own-source supply chains. So technology of choice at the time of large supply and demand gap is not always the best available technology, but once it becomes dominant in the market, it optimizes the business environment. So we should be carefully create a situation with close collaboration between U.S. and Japan and like-minded countries. And also, a second thing I'd like to highlight, I'd like to have some couple suggestions, but second thing, be more trade-related issues. So I think to strengthen the trade relationship on energy and infrastructure in third country by leveraging U.S. Japan cooperation is important. And while pursuing a resource procurement, partners and network in the market. So also seek mutual dependence through the trade relationship rather than extensively seeking a decoupling from China. Especially for, let's say, clean energy supply chain issues, China is not, say, separated out from discussion because they are a major stakeholder in this process. So in recent years, there has been a trend to seek decoupling as a strategic shift, whereby China switches its position from economic growth to market dominance. So sometimes the trade remedies such as anti-dumping and or countervailing duties and incentive for domestic content were used seeking the appropriate market conditions. But the efforts have been also made to encourage reshoring of the product. But those trend and trade remedies, however, will not revert back to the market conditions what it was in the decades ago. So dependence of rare earth element for which China plays a substantial role in extraction and processing will further grow as we move toward more sophisticated products and services and increase the power system reliance on renewables. So it is important to seek mutual dependence through the trade relationship on energy and on various goods and services rather than extensively seeking decoupling from China. And also, let me touch upon the trade relationship. Taking example of LNG trade and also nuclear development, which Japan and the U.S. has closely working together in the past to build an intertwined business ecosystem. Especially on energy and infrastructure trade relationship, help maintain a long-term relationship between the countries. And those projects led not only to the infrastructure development and provision of technical services, but also the decade-long relationship between exporting and recipient countries. including human and institution capacities and private sector partnership and R&D. So there already exists a vital and intertwined industry ecosystem between the United States and Japan on nuclear and other industry areas. So we could, and those could be potentially benefit the other industry, other countries in the Pacific areas. So it would be useful to seek opportunities by leveraging U.S. Japan cooperation and strengthen trade relationship for energy and infrastructure in third countries. So while pursuing diversification of resource procurement partners in critical minerals and network in the market.
Thank you. Takeuchi-san?
Thank you. Yeah, the Japanese government has announced several plans for clean energy innovation. The most upstream one is the GX 2040 vision. And one of the pillars of this vision is to collaborate towards a realistic transition, taking into account the situation in European countries and the United States. I believe that the word realistic transitions means that Japan will take a different path from the somewhat overly idealistic European countries. And regarding the cooperation, it is not limited to bilateral relationship between the United States and Japan, but also includes multilateral cooperation with Asian countries. For example, LNG, liquefied natural gas, is becoming increasingly important in the long-term transition. And it is a right strategy to wait for innovation to mature while reducing CO2 emissions using LNG instead of coal. It is almost certain that the demand for LNG in Asian countries will increase from now on. Yeah, however, the future demand of LNG in Japan is highly uncertain because there are many factors that make forecasting difficult, including the amount of renewable energy installed, the amount of nuclear power operating, and the growth of the electricity demand due to the use of AI. So under the uncertainty of LNG demand in Japan, it is difficult to make decisions on LNG purchasing contracts and capital investment that require long-term commitment. But I hope that a scheme for using LNG from the United States together with Asian countries will help resolve this issue. Creating a mechanism to increase the use of LNG from the United States throughout Asia would be beneficial for both Japan and the United States. In my view, Japan can take the lead in providing technologies and funds to Asian countries in this regard.
Great. Thank you. Last but not least, Tomita-san.
Yeah, thank you. So from the finance perspective, my quick answer is the financing transition never conclude within the single country. I mean, the financing, yeah, of course there is an investment in Japan, but also generally the energy doesn't conclude within a single country. We need the energy and invest in the energy supply chain. So in this sense, when I take one example, the hydrogen or fuel ammonia to transform the fossil fuel power generation. So Japan, the GX policy will channel the substantial investment to fuel ammonia and hydrogen co-firing technologies within the power plant. And in the United States, also the hydrogen, production of the hydrogen or clean ammonia is eligible under the support of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure and the Jobs Act as well. So this is the one example of the opportunity for the bilateral collaboration. If I take another more direct example, the opportunity, the natural gas, as mentioned, as already mentioned at Takeuchi-san. The recent joint leadership by President Trump and Prime Minister Ishiba showed the intention to export LNG to Japan in the mutually beneficial manner. So what's the benefit to Japan? Japan is a fossil fuel dependent country, so we need the LNG, liquefied natural gas, for the intermediate step toward the transitions. So the exporting the U.S. LNG will contribute to stabilizing the gas price for long term, so that enables the Japanese power sector to transition toward clean with an intermediate step. Also, this creates a further opportunity as Asian countries, as already mentioned by Takeuchi-san as well, because Asian countries are now heavily dependent on fossil fuel, particularly coal, so need natural gas for the intermediate steps. There is huge demand, so Japan and the U.S. we can collaborate to create a demand, create a market, energy market for the clean energy transition. So this is the opportunities. And the challenge side, there is a lot of challenge. Every single challenge, we need to mobilize all the policy measures, including the upfront investment, the risking schemes, also the government guarantee scheme as well. But if I take one particular example of the financial side, so financial regulators can have a critical role. In that sense, I will introduce one Japanese example. So Japanese Financial Services Agency, which is the regulator in Japan, recently convened the international partnership named the Asia GX Consortium, which comprised of the development bank, Japanese large commercial banks, and the financial regulators from ASEAN countries to develop the dedicated transition market, dedicated capital market transition in ASEAN markets. So such collaboration will create confidence, will contribute to make investors more confident about the transition, not green. There's already developed a market for green, but also we can collaborate to develop the capital market for transition, dedicated capital market transition to attract more capital. And the important thing, the Asian Development Bank is one of the members of the consortium, and the United States has a strong influence on ADB. So there's still opportunity to collaborate.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me quickly open the floor for audience, or actually Q&A questions from those of you in the room. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ann Vroom. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about the issue of, fossil fuel emissions remediation, specifically carbon capture. Is Japan doing any carbon capture endeavors, such as we are exploring here in the U.S. with carbon capture and sequestration, or are you simply just emitting at this point from fossil fuel electrical plants? Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Nari. I'm with the GR company, and my question is more broad. I wanted to ask about the elephant in the room, the Trump administration's tariff. How would that impact the Japan's collaboration or the Japan's clean energy transformation moving forward? Thank you.
So, so we have two questions, but please, feel free to answer the ones where you think you have, views or something, responses.
I start with the CSIS questions.
Yes.
So Japan has, I think we already spent quite some years in experimental, say, CO2 injection in the place. And there's already a couple of places, and we closely monitor the result. But so far, technologically it is established, but the question is geographic formation. Most of the geographic formation in Japan, which is suitable for carbon storage, CO2 storage, is mostly, under the sea, in deep channels. So that potentially result in some, environmental issues and also fishery industry's impact. So those are carefully need to be considered. So what we are currently seeking as an alternative, while we are still doing the CCS experimentation, and also looking at closely about the potential of the geographic formation where we can do it. But at the same time, we are also experimenting the ammonia co-firing for coal-fired power plant, and also hydrogen co-firing in a natural gas-fired plant. And we are now gradually increase the level of co-firing in those plants, and so far it is successful. So for the hydrogen ammonia, the question is where we can import those hydrogen and ammonia, and how that transportation can readily available in a large volume which we may need.
Thank you, Nishimura-san. Would anyone like to take the second question about the tariffs?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We can start. So about tariffs, as I briefly mentioned, clean energy technologies need not only the critical minerals, but it also need base metals like, say, aluminum and zinc and iron steel. Especially for the offshore wind, zinc is needed, to make it sturdy in a harsh environment, and also all the windmills need a heavy iron steel to stand still in hard weather conditions. So we ourselves can produce iron steel and aluminum domestically, so it doesn't make any difference for Japanese domestic situation. But the tariffs recently discussed in the United States, which also impose on the aluminum and iron steel, supposed to be coming from Mexico or Canada. So I think that will immediately impact the cost of those, clean energy technologies installed in the United States. So I understand offshore wind and some other types of wind farms already experienced the increased cost of materials before this tariff issues coming. And also they are slow in development because of also high financial costs here in the United States. So I think it may make those green energy technology installation more difficult in terms of finance.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was a very succinct answer to a fairly complex and dynamic question. But thank you to the audience for two great questions, and thank you to the three experts for sharing your, your perspectives. And definitely, this is a preview of what will be this really great essays that will be coming online in a couple weeks. So please stay tuned, and please join me in thanking the Japanese authors.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm Nick Cheney again, and pleasure to be joined on stage with some of our American colleagues to get their perspectives on a range of issues we've been discussing today. To my immediate left is Jennifer Shook-Page, who's a managing principal at the Asia Group, and she is the former managing director for bilateral climate action in the office of the U.S. Presidential Envoy for Climate in the U.S. Department of State. In the middle, we have Nick Lombardo, and Nick is the senior program director for international policy at ClearPath here in Washington. And doing double duty, my colleague Jay Nakano, of course, senior fellow with the Energy Security and Climate Change Program here at CSIS. Thank you all. So let's get right to it. Jane, during the first panel with our Japanese colleagues, we heard some references to both the challenges associated with economic competition with China, also questions about the degree to which decoupling from China should take place, which I found very interesting. Before we get into the U.S. perspectives on collaboration in this area, could we just open the aperture a bit? Can you talk from a U.S. perspective about the underlying geopolitical dynamics that are driving initiatives in this area?
Sure. Thank you so much, Nick. So I think there are three major key currents in this the geopolitical dynamics that are shaping sort of clean energy space, supply chains, innovation, and finance. And first and foremost, really China. I mean, we can't really, not talk about it. The country, how, China has really succeeded in extending its capacity from more of a, perhaps lower-end manufacturing country to capturing the higher-end downstream energy, clean energy technologies, whether it's the EV batteries, solar, and some of the wind components, but then also the underlying critical minerals. And it's, in many ways, I think there had been a lot of sort of a complementary relationship between China and the West. But I think, much more in recent years, and certainly within this decade, there's this realization that perhaps the dependence of this magnitude or high dependence on China could be challenging, particularly given how China is becoming increasingly assertive. There's also a much more clear way of divergence between what China prioritizes and also the West, namely Tokyo, Washington, Canberra, Ottawa. Some of these countries prioritize. But then also there was the COVID pandemic induced supply chain challenges that we all lived through. So supply chain, it's not just a supply chain part, but to some extent, I think this economic interdependence, whether it's the finance, innovation, supply chains, there have been a lot of a relook as to how we can try mitigate, how we can really try to mitigate some of the risks that may arise from sudden changes in this landscape. Quickly, the second one, I also wanted to, but by the way, and the idea isn't so much, in my view, to really exclude China, but I think there's a need to diversify, whether it's the finance, more private finance, more Western financing, things like mining, processing, and as well. And then also I think that Russian invasion of Ukraine was another major geopolitical event that really started shaping how we might look at clean energy. The way that European economies responded was to really try to shift away from not just Russia but also hydrocarbons. To be able to secure its energy system, they started investing much more into things like hydrogen and ammonia. So that also, I think, showed how much more, sort of a spotlight on clean energy cooperation, and not just on, consultations on greenhouse gas emissions in the scheme of this, clean energy dialogue around the world. Third, quickly, I think also the global South, I think it's often underlooked. I think when we think of minerals, obviously many of the global South economies have a lot of resources that, the U.S. and Japan and others may be interested. How we manage that relationship is extremely important, how the equitable engagement, I think without the equitable engagement, I think it could be a source of volatility, source of geopolitical concern, but also they're a really important market for many of these clean energy technologies that the U.S. and Japan and our partner countries can provide. And certainly, as their economies develop, their energy consumption will grow, and the attendant emissions growth is fairly pretty straight forward sort of a scenario. And in that context, working with the global South, is also helps the advanced economies address the challenge, many of the challenges associated with the global climate change. So those are three sort of occurrences that I would highlight as far as geopolitical dynamics go.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Great backdrop for our discussion. Nick, let me turn to you. It strikes me that there were a lot of developments between the U.S. and Japan in this area during the first Trump administration. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could just highlight a few of those things and things that you think might be carrying forward now.
Yeah,
just to
absolutely.
Provide
Thanks.
Some historical context.
I appreciate that, fellow Nick. And thank you and Jane and the whole CSIS team for having me participate in this project, and thank you to our new friends from Japan, our fellow authors. To answer your question, a half dozen or so things come to mind, but I think we can just first ground that in how close of a working relationship President Trump had with former Prime Minister Abe, may he rest in peace, and that the two of them worked through some really challenging issues together. And they, in fact, President Trump met with Prime Minister Abe more times than any other leader on a bilateral basis. So I think that's commensurate with the importance that we place on this relationship between our two countries. So some of the things that I would note during the first Trump administration, one of which was mentioned already, was the quick start of a Japan-U.S. Strategic energy partnership, which over the course of the administration served as a productive mechanism to work across a lot of technologies that the U.S. and Japan were prioritizing, from advanced nuclear to CCS to LNG, hydrogen, and others. And so I think that set a good tone for where the relationship is right now in the first meeting of President Trump and Prime Minister Ishiba last month. Quickly on the heels of that, I'd also note the creation in 2018 of the Asia Edge program, which worked across the interagency as a coordinating mechanism to help bring a whole of government approach to energy diplomacy, energy security initiatives, and working with partners like Japan, making strategic investments across the Indo-Pacific. Civil nuclear cooperation across the board was a pillar of the relationship during the first Trump administration, expanding agreements on SMR development, commercial partnerships, and workforce training programs. CCS, there was a number of initiatives, including memorandum of cooperation for collaboration in that space, which helped support projects like we've seen with Petronova in Texas. I'd also, this isn't specific to the U.S. Japan relationship, but it's important to note the creation of the U.S. Development Finance Corporation during the first Trump administration, and also the longest reauthorization of the U.S. Export-Import Bank along with the creation of the China and Transformational Exports Program through that reauthorization. That enabled the U.S. to be a more strategic partner with our Indo-Pacific allies and working closely with counterparts in Japan to be able to bring financing solutions to combat China's Belt and Road Initiative largely. And then domestically, I think there are a number of things that happened that just made the U.S. a stronger partner to work with. And I'd note there quickly the Energy Act of 2020 that passed, the launch of the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, and generally increased investments in clean energy, R&D, and advanced manufacturing.
Excellent. Thank you. Jenny, same question for you. I mean, significant momentum during the Biden administration. So if you wouldn't mind, just highlight what you think some of the most significant developments were, just sort of as a backdrop for carrying us forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you for having me here. So just to start by saying that Japan is really an important partner for the United States on energy, on the energy transition, and on energy security. And I think we did a fairly good job over the last 4 years threading a through line between ambition to implementation. In 2021, Japan really was a leader with the United States, where at the leader level, we set forth ambitious targets for decarbonization, and that really set a foundation for how we then continued to cooperate and build on that with targeted dialogues on energy security through our energy security dialogue, through Department of Energy dialogues on emerging clean technologies, and work streams that generally allowed us to align on our energy security and energy transition priorities, both in our respective economies and then how we approach the world. I would say we also partnered quite well globally, whether that was through our co-leadership on the Just Energy Transition Plan in Indonesia, or through mechanisms like the Quad, where we worked on clean energy supply chains with Australia's leadership there. I do think that the rubber really hit the road in terms of connecting our respective energy and industrial policies. Probably last year, around the Prime Minister Kishida's visit, there were a number of really big announcements related to U.S. Japan partnership on fusion, on the DOE Earthshot programs and our partnership there. And then we also started a new mechanism on how to align and maximize the impact of Japan's green transformation, its GX initiative, and the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. That was really, I thought, a good symbol for how we could take what we were doing domestically in our economies and find ways that we could enhance the synergies, particularly on hydrogen. There was a really clear supply and demand dynamic going on that we were able to actually improve and fine-tune so that we were able to fully deliver on that commitment. And then also we were able to work through other aspects of how do we set forth the right demand signals and incentives to help energy technologies accelerate. And I thought we were able to learn a lot from each other and also make sure that we were better through our partnership with each other.
Great, thank you. I liked what you said about connecting the energy and industrial policies between the two countries. Quite clear, we've established a lot of momentum there. But you also talked about the transition from ambition to implementation, and that's a great segue to the second part of our conversation. Jenny, let me stay with you. You just talked about the role of government in sending signals to the private sector. If you could talk a little bit more about that, and also how best should the U.S. and Japan finance projects or encourage private sector finance? Just a few concrete suggestions would be great.
Yeah, I think that this is an area where there's no lack of interest. We have strong MOUs and points of cooperation between the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, our EXIM Bank, and our U.S. TDA with their Japanese counterparts. So there is good communication there and a strong desire to partner. I think the next step is then finding out how do we deliver some more outcomes through that process. And I think that does require a lot of focus and kind of clear task-oriented strategy. So whether that is taking these MOUs and identifying 3 core areas where we focus, whether that's critical minerals or deployment of specific advanced technologies like geothermal, and then setting up a structure for collaboration that enables us to achieve those co-investment goals. DFC has had some success by setting up co-investment platforms with their counterparts in other countries, such as the IDB. And I think setting up a platform for co-investment, following that with collaboration on sharing pipeline information for projects, going on trips together to scout markets, and ensuring that our representatives in country are actively coordinating so that we can find specific projects in the private sector will be really valuable as we try to also address some of the areas of divergent investment criteria that will also help us be successful there.
Great, thanks. I really like the reference to our governments as enablers. And there's such a robust list of initiatives on which to build, and really, really encouraged to hear about all the prospects. We appreciate your perspective. Nick, your task was to think about innovation, which is hard to define. So if you'd like to do that, feel free from your perspective. But if you could also tee up some potential near-term priorities for the U.S. and Japan in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. Frankly, the first best thing that the U.S. could do to be a better partner for Japan and other allies is to let America build the energy infrastructure that we're talking about. Get out of our own way, cut red tape. Tax incentives we've been talking a lot about, but you also need to be able to have a streamlined regulatory and permitting framework that will allow American innovators actually get steel in the ground and get these projects done. And by virtue of doing so, also make the U.S. a more welcoming environment for Japanese investment into U.S. energy infrastructure. So I would start there. But kind of picking up more on the international piece of it, we've talked about the Development Finance Corporation and the Export-Import Bank, both of which are up for reauthorization this Congress, which should be an opportunity to strengthen and enhance both of those agencies. So with the Development Finance Corporation, for instance, this is a little bit wonky, but there's an issue with the budgetary scoring of their equity investments that needs to get fixed. We need to expand their lending authority and also look at broader country eligibility. So the U.S. and Japan could more easily co-finance in countries like Indonesia, for instance. With the EXIM reauthorization in 2026, I mentioned the China Transformational Export Program, CTEP. That could be broadened and enhanced as well to a wider suite of energy technologies. The establishment of a national interest account could align EXIM more closely with DFC and other counterparts. They have a national security component to it, and potentially exempting certain strategic projects from EXIM's default rate cap. I think it's also important to align those with our partners in Japan so that, again, we can be more in concert when we're going overseas for these financing projects.
Great. And Jane already had a robust conversation about supply chain resiliency in the first panel, but I'd like you to put your panelist hat on now and share your thoughts on that.
Sure. No, thank you so much. And it's the beauty of working with such experts like Nishimura-san is that, he's already laid out so, nicely all these, challenge points. But also, especially, I think from the U.S. perspective, I wanted to mention that, well, there's some, I guess, slight differences, I think, from how Japan sees the areas of supply chain challenges from how we might see from the United States. But I think there is quite a bit of consensus that critical minerals is a challenge area. Again, I wanted to emphasize it's not just the mining and processing capacities, but the type of money that's available to be able to unlock. Also, the clean energy technologies in general. I think both Japan and Korea, for example, in EV battery segments, have been producing more, anodes and cathodes, and it's very important. It's a good news, but at the same time, China has been doing that sometimes faster. So, both the pie, is increasing. I mean, the production of these anodes and cathodes, and still, I think, Japan and Korea's, outputs have been increasing. But as far as the shares go, I think China's share is still growing. So it's definitely a sort of continuing challenge. When it comes to nuclear, I think, there are sort of large forging capacities, fabrication that the Biden administration supply chain report highlights as one of the sort of challenges. Those are mainly required for replacements, not necessarily for the large, the new construction, unless we'll be building large capacity, light water reactors. Although there has been more momentum now that there's this growing power demand forecast. But also the fuels, the nuclear fuel is an important part. Both both Russia and China are key countries that produce enriched uranium fuel, and then I think it's roughly about 35% of what U.S. imports comes from Russia. So that's a challenge. Obviously there has been some domestic legislation, a lot of efforts both from the Congress, the White House, as well as from the industries to try to really rectify that challenge. But I think more needs to be done. Also in the electric power system, there is I think electrification is a main way to reduce the greenhouse gases. So there's already this electrification trend that's been, well captured in a lot of, global energy outlook documents from a lot of different entities. But on top of that, in the past, 12 months or so, we're seeing, huge demand that's discussed, and that's also, projected from, running the AI, artificial intelligence, but then also data centers to underpin this, very, cutting edge, advanced technology field. So that really adds to the ongoing growth in electricity demand. So there, I think, our system in the United States could benefit from more cooperation. And I think Chinese components have been, part of the U.S. electric power system. They're, quite low cost. From the perspective of sort of securing supply chains, I think maybe more could be done. Perhaps it's not so much I think the U.S. suppliers can also produce more, but in general, there's just the more demand for transmission transmission lines, different equipment, as well as power generation assets. So that could be an area for cooperation, as well as fuel, nuclear fuel supply chains, where it's not just the low enriched uranium for the existing light water reactors, but HALEU, highly high assay, low enriched uranium that's needed for many of the advanced small modular reactors that are being developed here in the United States and in a couple other countries. But that's also where, perhaps the U.S. the whole supply chains or value chains could be nicely aligned, with the U.S. technologies and perhaps Japanese, companies supplying some of the components. And then quickly, I guess, as far as the opportunities go, if I may, I think when it comes to critical minerals, that's where it really has to go beyond bilateral cooperation. Minilateral or multilateral, whether it's mini or truly vast multilateral, they're really critical. So initiatives like Quad, Jenny mentioned it already. I think that's very important. We already saw at least the Quad foreign ministers meeting right after the inauguration, but International Energy Agency has been undertaking a lot of critical minerals related work in the past couple of years. And also, I think, Mineral Security Partnership is a U.S. Initiated multilateral initiative to really engage resource-rich sort of emerging and developing economies. And their financing from Japanese entities such as JOGMEC and a couple other institutions from Japan, together with the U.S., and have been really looking at different projects around the world. And this really covers the entire value chains, not just the mining bit, but also recycling. So this is an important initiative, and it's truly multilateral in that currently South Korea is the chair. And I think, I would really encourage colleagues from Japan to consider perhaps, being the, future chair of the multilateral initiatives such as Mineral Security Partnership to really, really help drive this agenda globally and successfully. But yeah, let me stop there.
Thank you. I'd like to invite the audience to chime in as well in just a second. But I have one sort of final lightning round question for each of you. I'm really struck by what appears to be a great degree of alignment between the United States and Japan on the agenda in this issue area. We've talked about critical minerals, nuclear energy, LNG, for example, robust government-to-government initiatives. We've talked about financial institutions that may be in need of reform but are in place to drive not only the bilateral agenda, but the provision of energy resources to other countries. And Jane, just your last point, the importance of looking at this issue area, not just strictly in a bilateral context, but also as a way to facilitate partnership with other countries, either so-called minilaterally or identifying multilateral institutions where the U.S. and Japan can advance this agenda. So great degree of alignment. I'm not trying to end on a sour note, but I think we have to be candid that there may be areas of divergence. So my last question is, is there any particular difference in perspective between the U.S. and Japan that you've heard today that you think should be sort of an agenda item for dialogue going forward? And if there's none, if we solve this challenge, that's fine too, but I'm just curious.
Shall I start? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it should be on the agenda, but should be certainly. I think both policymakers from Washington and Tokyo would benefit from just keeping in the back of their minds as we sit down for hopefully many productive rounds of dialogues and consultations. One is I think the way we look at the China challenge is still a bit different. I think Japan is probably looks at it much more on how to manage sort of China challenge in the context of interdependence, the degree of it. Whereas in the United States, it's very much much more like this geopolitical rivalry of sort of galactic magnitude at times, and even looking at the AI competition, that's it is in this immediate context, it's how to meet the AI-driven, data center-driven electric power demand, but how to stay competitive vis-a-vis China on things like AI. But I think there are different levels of exposures to Chinese economy that certainly shapes how policymakers try to consider different options in front of them. The other thing, I was really struck by what Dr. Takeuchi said about how Japan looks at clean energy. It's really not just for environmental or just to reduce emissions. It's really part of Japan's energy security strategy formulation. That's a perspective that, for better or worse, isn't really part of the how we think about this area. Fortunately, we're so we have a wealth of hydrocarbons and a lot of natural resources, even food security. I mean, we're probably one of the most secure nations on the earth. And so I think, as we try to identify, whether it's supply chains or innovations or finance, how the other party rank orders may be different and because of some of the much, bigger sort of priorities that are driving. So those are two that really stay with me throughout the course of the day.
Great, thanks. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to just summarize kind of my three big takeaways of where we've got alignment throughout our conversations. One is all about the clean energy expansion to meet the growing demand that we are seeing in both countries. Also securing energy supply chains broadly, and really both countries having an all-of-the-above approach to our energy mix, whether that's across nuclear, LNG, CCS technologies, you name it. I think there's just like a lot of alignment there. I'm going to take a slight variation of the misalignment question to highlight one bonus near-term thing that we could do together.
Sure.
And that's where I think international financial institutions like the World Bank are misaligned on nuclear technology based on the U.S. and Japanese interests as the two largest shareholders in the bank. Currently, the World Bank has a moratorium on financing nuclear projects. More so, by their own internal policy, they won't even go to the extent of learning about nuclear technology. They won't build internal expertise on it. So one small step that the U.S. and Japan together could do would be the establishment of a nuclear technology trust fund at the bank to start to build that institutional knowledge internally so that we can have that financing brought to bear for energies that want to consider, or countries that want to consider nuclear energy as part of their mix.
Great. Jen?
Yeah, I think a lot has been covered, but to maybe build on that, I think, one kind of theme that was prevalent across the discussion was just the connection between our energy security and our economic security, and kind of a shared recognition that ensuring our economic security means making sure that our companies and our industries are competitive in the clean technologies of the future. And that includes, I think, looking at, in comparison to today's world, but being in the leadership roles on both the innovation side and the manufacturing side is something we talked a lot about. And what are the demand and supply mechanisms that government can play to encourage investment in this space? And I think sort of in today's new global trade dynamics and views on where supply chains should go, I think there's a need. I think we both see that there's a need to sort of reassess what does that supply chain diversification look like, and how we maintain strength through interdependence, so that we keep some of those synergies as we go forward, because there's a lot more that we can do together.
Wonderful. Great, thank you all. We have some time for interventions from the audience, if anyone would like. Sure, just please identify yourself.
Thank you. And thanks again for this invitation to the panel. My name is Tom Lutkin. I'm a science fellow at the Environmental Law Institute. I had a question. We've been obviously talking a lot about supply side. in the energy transition. Did you guys cover anything in the demand side thing? I know that Jane, you mentioned just here at the end about, increased demand from new sources that we weren't expecting 5 or 10 years ago with, new data centers and things like this. But, or is it that both governments and their policies are more naturally positioned for supply side policy and demand management? So any comments on that? Thanks.
Who wants to start?
Sure. So for my supply chain conversation, I think when in my essay, there is a dimension of the OECD economies as a buyer of some of the minerals that are important and what that may mean and how the whole equitable sort of transaction dimension. But I think for now. It's not so much, and also, I mean, my understanding, it's not so much like just for the policy, practitioners to think of. So I think, for my segment, I will be, also based on this morning's workshop, I'll be discussing a little more about sort of a demand pool that's created from the private sector as well. And that also, including nuclear, including some of these power supply components.
Comments on the demand front?
I guess I could add a little bit to that. I would just say by all projections, demand is already increasing, right, on its own. For the U.S.'s part, we're going to need to grow our energy resources by about equal the size of Texas's grid in 10 years. So that's why I think we're talking about the technologies that we need to bring to bear to address that.
Great. Please.
Thank you. Ann Vroom again. Thank you for letting me ask the second question. I hope everybody else asked what they wanted to. I'm from the private investment sector side. It seems to me there's almost increasing uncertainty about these huge investments regarding the carbon emission standards, limitations, goals. Are those, it seems as though we're pivoting in our vocabulary to where we don't want to talk about the COP goals anymore. And if we're not moving towards those, then, for example, we don't need to do CCS, capture and sequestration. We can just emit the carbon. How is that playing out? Is it changing? Are we, i.e., the West, less interested in achieving those goals than we were a few years ago, where it was the dominant topic of conversation? Because that gives private equity, for example, a lot of uncertainty about what is the framework. No matter what it is it in flux now? And it seems as though that will have a huge impact on the dynamics of investment. Thank you. If you have any comments.
Who wants to start?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think you are seeing sort of these dynamics at a crossroad right now where countries are grappling with how they're balancing economic growth and decarbonization goals and making sure that the two are as aligned as possible so that the trade-offs either way are minimized. And I do think that we've seen through, industrial policy in the U.S. and in Europe, and we've made refinements, and other countries are making adjustments as well to make sure that, while the through line and the goal is clear, that they're doing these policies in a way that enable investment and don't put excess burdens on companies. But I think the long-term goal is still there. So.
This doesn't directly have to do with private finance and how this shapes the flows, but I would add that there is a geopolitical element to this where the U.S. does not want to find itself behind as a leader of many of these clean energy technologies and find ourselves in similar situations as to what we've described in the critical minerals space or uranium fuel supply and things of those nature. So I think that as a national initiative, driving American clean energy innovation and global clean energy leadership is a priority.
You want to?
I don't.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Before we thank our distinguished speakers, my colleague Jane is going to take us home. So any closing remarks you want to offer?
Okay, shall I stay here? Was it the
Whatever you like.
Oh, well, let me just stay here then. So we, this morning we spent 3 hours really sharing our sort of analyses of what's been happening in the respective space and what more could be done. And I just cannot be more excited about our essays to be coming out in a couple of weeks. This is an extremely dynamic space, not just for many of the external political, the geopolitical forces, but then also, internally, and it's not just Washington and Tokyo. A lot of, policymakers and industry leaders are thinking and rethinking, trying to revise, fine-tune how to really tackle this dual challenge of energy security and decarbonization. And it's an exciting time, and I am extremely grateful that the Japan chair picked this topic, and we were able to cooperate. And I think, the two economies have so much capacity, and truly I think, a lot of economies, because of the way to some extent, slight differences in how, two countries may approach some of the issues, maybe a little more incremental in Japan's case, transitional as well as transformational. But, I think, together, two countries can appeal to wider pool of economies that may be interested in embarking on the clean energy, not just deployment, but perhaps being part of this value chains that's emerging. So thank you so much to those of you that stayed, that joined online, but then certainly for those of you in the audience for great questions and all your attention. And please, please reach out with any questions, any suggestions, any feedback. And again, thank you so much. Please join us in thanking everyone.